This episode is sponsored by Podcorn. Podcorn is a marketplace that connects podcasters to amazing podcast sponsorship opportunities like host-read ads, interview segments, topical discussions, integrations, and more. With Podcorn, there's no middleman. Podcasters of all sizes can browse and choose opportunities that fit their style and listener demographic, set their own rates, and collaborate with brands directly without being exclusive. You never give up any rights to your podcast, and Podcorn is here to support you at every step to ensure you're protected and compensated for the work that you do for brands. I personally think Podcorn is a great platform. Browsing sponsorships is simple, placing bids is a breeze, and getting paid for sponsorships is hassle-free. Plus, you get to have the knowledge of exactly what you're promoting, and you don't have to have millions of listeners to be considered. Follow the link in Demiworld's show notes to sign up to Podcorn and start browsing sponsorship opportunities today. This is Demiworld.
Oh my God!
So should we start?
Sure, let's start.
All right, so this is Demiworld, and today we're talking about unsolved missing person things. Is that what it was?
Yes, that's such an astute title for this episode. I think that's what we're going to have to call it. Wait, what did you just say?
Unsolved missing person things? Is that what I said? Thingies?
It's unsolved mysteries, yes, disappearances.
Yeah, that's what it was. Disappearances. Oh my God, that was so funny. I was like, I totally just blanked. I'm like, I know what my thing's about, but what is the blanket topic about?
Oh, I do that every episode. You are well aware of this. That's why I try to pay attention more, because I'm like, you sound like a dum-dum, Kelly. Every episode, I'm like, today we're talking about... What are we talking about again?
I need to have it written down on a little cue card. We're talking about. So
disappearances.
Disappearances. Okay.
And never reappearances, I guess, because
they're not solved. They're unsolved disappearances.
Permanent disappearances.
Yes, permanent disappearances. You went first last time. Do you want me to go ahead and go?
Sure.
All right. Maybe it'll help your mood a little bit. Hopefully, getting a little story told to you.
Okay.
So mine is The Lost Colony of Roanoke.
Oh my God, I was totally going to do that, Cyndi, and I didn't, but it was on
It's on your list.
It was like between that and one other thing.
Yes. Yeah. This was between this one and a couple of missing kids, which is very fascinating what might have happened to them. But I did this instead because I first heard about this when I was in 8th grade, and I was like, wait, what? An entire colony of people just disappeared? How was that even possible? This is crazy. So this is something that I've been enamored with for a really long time, decades at this point.
So happy that you're doing this, because I was like, because I'm interested by it too, but I really know nothing about it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, if I do this as an episode, it'll be a great way to learn. And then I was like, wow, this is a lot of information. I don't want to learn.
It's pretty long, so I'm going to try to keep it really tight. I've been practicing it, so I didn't stumble too much. I've got all of my weird words written down phonetically, so hopefully that'll help too.
Me. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, so for anybody out there who does not know what the Lost Colony of Roanoke is, in the late 1500s, England tried twice to set up a colony on Roanoke Island, which is on the east coast of the United States. It's a small island that is in a bay, and they left, 150 people here. And then when they came back to bring supplies, part of the colony was gone and all of the people were gone. So the houses and the people were missing.
It's off of the coast of North Carolina?
North Carolina, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's see. We're going to go all the way back to April 27th, 1584. So two captains, Captain Philip Amatus and Arthur Barlow, left England in two well-stocked ships to explore the New World for Sir Walter Raleigh. Sir Walter Raleigh was a courtier for Elizabeth I and perhaps one of her 3 or 4 lovers. By July 13th, so a few months later, they landed in North Carolina coast about 24 miles north of Roanoke Island. They claimed the land for Elizabeth I and England. Explorers set off and came upon Roanoke Island, which lay beyond the natural jetty created by Nag's Head Island. Nag's Head Island is this really long, thin island that creates a bay behind it where there's a couple of islands, and Roanoke is one of them.
Okay.
The explorers find a peaceful Indian village on the island and had a short welcoming ceremony with them. The explorers described the Roanoke Island as, quote, a most pleasant and fertile ground, replenished with goodly cedars and divers of other sweet wood, full of currants, flax, and many other notable commodities, end quote.
Can't wait to kill all these native folks who so lovingly welcomed us to the island.
On my land, bitch. So, currants are grapes, and flax is spelled with an E because there's no standardization of English yet. Thankfully, I didn't have to read too much stuff like this because I can't stand to read old documents like this where all the S's look like giant F's and things. It's just too much.
Oh, yeah.
So in addition to all of these notable commodities, there are also a lot of game and fish as well in the area. So there's lots of food to be had. So the spring following the explorers' journey to the New World, Sir Walter Raleigh sent 108 settlers to Roanoke. The village was captained by Raleigh's cousin, Sir Richard Grenville, who was a complete douchebag. In June, the settlers began exploring the island near Roanoke. During this time, the Assacogac tribal members stole a silver cup from the settlers. In retaliation for the theft, and to put the natives in their place, Grenville had their village burnt.
Oh, that seems appropriate. Eye for an eye.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, doesn't seem overboard at all.
Do you think they even really took the cup?
Who knows? It might have just been an excuse, right?
Oh, like the next day, Indians. Someone like finds the cup and they're like all embarrassed, like, "Oops, I guess I just won't mention it."
I
just
no.
Just toss
I don't. They would be like, "Oh, I found the cup." It was like, "Oh well, ha 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 ha." One more less Indian village. Okay, the explorers decided on a location near the northern shore of Roanoke to build a fort under the leadership of Ralph Lane, who was appointed mayor. They called the fort the New Fort in Virginia. So imaginative. The site of the original fort is now where Fort Raleigh National Historic Site sits. This is where I got a lot of this information too. The remains of the fort were still visible in late 1896. So 300 years later, that's pretty good. They did a good job building it.
Yeah.
Around the fort, the settlers built dwellings for living. These were constructed of brick, wood, and thatched roofs. All right. So relations with the indigenous tribes remained friendly for a little while. The Indians made fish traps and planted corn for the English colonists. The men chosen to establish this first settlement were skilled laborers. They were botanists, astronomers, scientists, paleontologists. Like, they were there to kind of figure out what was in America. They were all like scientists.
Right.
With a smattering of soldiers, which would explain things getting burned down. But there was no women, so obviously the permanence of the settlement was impossible. They'd have to bring in more people. But first they were just kind of going to lay the groundwork, figure out what they had. It didn't take long for most of the first colonists to grow tired of sleeping on hard beds and eating strange, bland food. As the seasons wore on and the food and supplies began to dwindle, relations with the Roanoke Indians broke down. And the Roanoke Indians aren't warlike. They're just like, here are these fucking white dudes showing up, wanting us to like plant corn for them and burn our shit down. Like, yeah, we're going to start to war with you. You're encroaching on our territory.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So obviously the initial burning of the village upon their arrival set the tone for how the English viewed the indigenous people of America and the hierarchy they expected. They're like, we're on top. You guys are below us now. This is our land. So by June 1st of 1586, 1 year after the arrival, the colonists were engaged in an all-out war with the Indians, which left many of the indigenous dead. Lane, the mayor of the settlement, who had returned to England for supplies, became delayed. Tired and demoralized, the settlers got word that Sir Francis Drake was off the coast of Carolinas, with 23 ships he had stole from the Spanish. So the Spanish are down in South America and in Florida and stuff, and they're just seizing all the gold from the Inca and whatnot and melting it down to bars and putting it on boats. And the English are taking all these boats as they're going up because they're just so heavy with all of this gold and jewels and stuff that they're easy pickings for the English.
Right.
So he offers to take them back to England, and the settlers are like, get us the fuck out of here, peace. And they get the hell out. They leave. Totally abandon the colony. So there's obviously a bit of a mix-up with ships and supplies since there's no mass communication. So while Drake is ferrying the colonists back to England, Grenville's supply ships show up and the settlement's abandoned. There's nobody there. So he's unwilling to lose the land for the crown. Grenville then leaves 15 men behind to hold the fort, literally. So just here's some guns, here's some food, 15 guys, bye.
Do you know how long it took for them for the ship ride back
It
then?
takes about 3 weeks.
Oh, that's shorter than I thought. I thought it would take like a couple months. Okay.
No, it doesn't take that long, actually.
Okay.
So in 1587, Sir Walter Raleigh organized a second expedition to settle America. He assembled 150 men, women, and children, so 17 women, 9 children, and the rest were men, in an effort to establish his colony finally. So instead of it being an assortment of skilled laborers this time, they're mostly just farmers. Another difference with this expedition is that there's a lot of backers. It's a corporate venture this time, with many investors funding the colonists. There's a lot of untapped resources. There's tobacco, wood, fur, minerals, and it's literally just a gold mine of opportunities. So a bunch of people are investing now in getting these settlers over there. And some of the settlers were offered upward of 150 acres of land for their own if they went out there and helped establish the colony. So they're kind of getting paid as well.
Right.
Okay, so when the new colonists arrive at the original fort site, there are no sign of the 15 men that Grenville had left behind, except for one, and he's a skeleton. And there are signs that he was killed by the Indians. I'm assuming that means there was probably arrows nearby, arrows maybe in the skeleton. Nobody really says what that means.
Right.
But what had happened to the others is a complete mystery. We have no idea what happened to the other 14 men. They might have gone inland. Nobody knows whatever happened to these guys. They might have just been all murdered. No bodies, though. Just one skeletal remain. So the rest of the village is overgrown and falling apart. So the original colonists had planned on setting up their base in the Chesapeake Bay, which is around, I didn't get an actual reading, but I think it's around 100, 150 miles north.
Okay.
But it's August, and it's starting to, get colder, so they just decide that they're going to reestablish the Roanoke settlement. So from the start of the new colony, the indigenous tribes in the area are hostile. No shit. We can assume that this is due to their earlier negative run-ins with the English. Soon after making land, James Howe, who was a ship's assistant, is killed by the indigenous. Manteo, who was a native and had previously gone back to England with Raleigh, knew English and worked as an interpreter between the Roanoke Indians and the settlers. However, peace could not be reached. So in retaliation for the missing 15 men Grenville had left behind and the murder of Howe, the settlement's new governor, Governor John White, attacked the Roanoke Indian village with fire and sword. But it was an epic blunder.
So they're blaming them for the missing 14 men, even though they could be alive on another island somewhere.
Yes, sure.
But they're just blaming them for leaving the island, I guess?
Well, possibly. I mean, there's the one dead man, and then there's the James Howe, who was also killed by an Indian. So whatever excuse they can use, silver cup, murdering people, it doesn't really matter. They're just trying to wipe out people. So they go and attack the Roanoke Indian village, but the Roanoke Indians had already abandoned the village. And instead, it is a peaceful group of Croatoan Indians who are sifting through what's left behind to see if there's anything they can use when Howe attacks and murders a bunch of innocent Indians.
Okay.
Yeah, so through the efforts of Manteo, he kind of smooths things over with the Croatoan and the English, but it seems like the Croatoan forgave the English, or maybe just pretended to. Hard to tell. So on August 13th, 1587, just a few days after they landed, Manitou is christened for his many years of faithful service to the crown and declared Lord of Roanoke. 5 days later, Virginia Dare is born to Eleanor and Ananias Dare, the first child of English parents to be born in the New World. Eleanor, Virginia's mother, is also Governor White's daughter. So now his daughter and granddaughter are the colonists in the New World. And there was another child born 5 days after that to Marjorie and Dionysus Harvey, but that child doesn't get named because this is a game of firsts and you just didn't make the cut, kid. I'm sorry. We don't know who you are. Your name's not important. America's number one. Okay, so then on the 27th, so it's about 2 weeks later, Governor White set sail for England to obtain more supplies for the colony. So he leaves his daughter, his newborn granddaughter, and goes back to England for supplies. But before White can set sail for England, the colonists had discussed relocating the colony 50 miles inland. So before he leaves, White details what he wants them to do if they do move the colony, what kinds of symbols he wants them to leave behind. And one of those is the Maltese cross, which means that they left in distress.
Tell me what that looks like again.
A Maltese cross is a short four-sided cross where all the sides are equal length. And they're kind of like triangles with the tops cut off, like they meet in the middle.
Right.
It's used a lot on awards, like medals.
Right.
You see them hanging on like people's chests and things. Okay, so White goes back to England, and en route, the war that had been brewing with Spain and England breaks out. All ships are commandeered for the war effort. This includes White's ship that he was using. So White isn't really anybody. He's just an artist who had gone to the Americas a few times and had made all the maps. So anytime you look at a map of the colony or anything from that era, he did it. So White's the primary artist for the maps of this area at the time.
Okay.
And so he's nobody. He's just an artist. So he has no clout with the court, and he cannot get back to the New World. So by April 1588, 8 months after he left the colony, White manages to convince the crown to allow him to return to Roanoke with 2 small ships and an inadequate amount of supplies. So like, this is all we can spare. Good luck. So, however, efforts to make it back to the New World didn't work out because every time the ship's captain saw a Spanish ship, they gave chase to get the gold from it. So they run out of supplies before they reach the New World, which only takes 2 weeks to get to, and they have to go back to England. Finally, in March of 1590, White, who had lost total credibility and favor with the court, secures passage via trade routes in the West Indies. And the West Indies are like down in Florida. It's like the Caribbean.
Right, okay.
All right. So they're going to go down there. They're going to do trading for tobacco and sugarcane and that sort of thing. So after the trading had finished, the ship lands up on the shores of Hatteras Island, which is one of those islands that makes up that jetty in front of it. And 3 years after he left, he finally makes it back to the colony. They can see smoke rising from Roanoke Island, giving them hope that the colonists are alive. So for whatever reason, they wait 3 whole days before they leave the ship to go and search for the colonists. A small group of men head out on, I guess what you call a dinghy, right? But they see another column of smoke coming from Nag's Head, and that is that long jetty. So they decide that they're going to go check that out instead, and it ends up being nothing. So
I feel like they're just a bunch of slackers who are like bogging everywhere they go. You know, they're just like, oh, it takes them 3 years to get everywhere. Like, I don't know. Like, instead of going to Roanoke, they actually, let's go check out that smoke over here though first. They're like,
I know, and I can't imagine what's going through White's head right now. He's like, I just want to get back to my daughter. Can I just get back to my fucking kid, please? Like, my granddaughter? Like, I want to know what happened to them. I can't imagine, like, how he's being treated. Like, nobody's listening to him. He's probably like, the fuck the column of smoke over there. Let's go to the island where I left everybody. Let's go there. So, it takes all day long to look at this other column of smoke that's nothing. They have to go back to the ship. So the next day they set out again, and one of the little boats they have capsizes and 6 men drowned. They finally make it to the shores of Roanoke. It's dark. They can't see anything anymore, and they've overshot where they wanted to land by about 1.5 miles. So they see lights on the island, and they start blowing a horn and singing English songs, but there's no return reply. So obviously whoever has the fire on the island is not English. So in the morning, they're able to get on the shores, and they start searching for the colony. And they find the letters CRO carved into a tree near the mouth of the settlement. All the houses have been taken down. They're not there anymore. And there's been a palisade of tree trunks built around the settlement. So it's like this big, heavy fence made of tree trunks.
Okay.
Around the fort. And it's obvious that it's not been lived in for quite some time. Everything's overgrown. Everything's falling apart. And then near the entrance of this palisade is the word Croatoan carved into it without the Maltese cross. And then there's just nobody. There's no bodies. There's nothing. So White still has hope that he can find his daughter and granddaughter at the nearby Croatoan village with Manteo. They planned on searching for the colonists the following day, but a storm hit, preventing the search. They instead try to go down to the West Indies to get more supplies, but they are blown off course by this storm and end up in the Azores, which is off the coast of Portugal.
Whoa, they got blown way off course, eh?
Yeah, I don't think it was just a storm. I think it might have been a hurricane.
It blew them to another country.
Yeah, it blew them across
from
the
North
ocean.
America to South America.
Back to Europe.
Back to Europe. Oh my god.
Back to Europe. Yes. So White was never able to return to Roanoke to search for the lost colonists. And nobody ever really seemed to look for them again. Nobody seemed to care. So, what the hell might have happened to them? And there's 4 working theories. The first one is that they were captured by the Spanish. So, at the time, England was at war with Spain, and they were also settling the New World in Florida and down in South America. So, the idea that the Spanish soldiers came across the settlement and took the villagers as hostages or slaves seemed possible at the time. So, when Raleigh first set up the colony back in 1585, he knew that he was circumventing the Spanish's desire to set up the New World colonies, right? He was getting in their way, and he was putting the English settlers at risk by doing this. So we do have written records that the Spanish had thought they wanted to go up there. They'd planned to go up and raid any colonies that the English had set up, but they just didn't get around to it. They just couldn't get around to it. And I think part of it was that by this time, in 1588, the Spanish Armada has been defeated by the English, and they're no longer a sea superpower. And that whole corridor there is just full of English Armada ships that are waiting to take down the Spanish. So having them go up there to try to raid a colony is putting more at risk than is necessary.
Right.
So assimilation or death. So the colonists assimilated into native society, most likely the Croatoan tribe, or they were killed by hostiles, perhaps the Wachis. We'll never know because nobody ever bothered to fucking look for them at the Croatoan tribe. Nobody bothered to look. Lost at sea. Some people think that they tried to build a ship and go back to England, but there's no sign that they built a ship. There's no shipbuilding, any signs anywhere that they tried to do this. Other people think it was a cover-up. It was a conspiracy. So when the supply ships returned 3 years later, they discovered a bunch of bodies that would have caused trouble for financiers. They needed to make the New World look as good as they possibly could to future settlers, so they quietly covered up what had happened there, that everybody had died, and they let the rumors swirl to intrigue new investors and new people to come to settle the New World. And it worked because people just started coming over in droves to become colonists. But they've done a bunch of digs there, and they've never found any bodies. So I don't think that if they buried them there on that ground, somebody would have found them. Maybe they buried the bodies at sea, that might be plausible. But still, conspiracies are hard. You got to keep a lot of people quiet.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the hard part with people don't think about conspiracies, like 9/11 conspiracies, like moon landing conspiracies. We were talking about this the other day. Like, there's so many people to keep quiet. Conspiracies are really hard to pull off.
Yeah, if you're a TSA agent getting paid $30,000 a year, you're not going to help the government to cover up 9/11. What would be the point?
No, you'd make way more in a book deal.
Exactly.
Way more in a book deal. You're like, I'm just going to write my story and sell it to the highest bidder. Problem solved. So there were new digs scheduled for late 2019 and into the 2020s, into this year. But many fear the colony is gone forever. So our friends over at The Particularly Dangerous Situation, which is a podcast devoted to extreme weather events, I think they would probably find this pretty interesting. So geologist J.P. Walsh of the University of North Carolina believes that the northern shore of Roanoke Island has receded more than 750 meters. That's nearly a football field. The recession, along with hurricanes over the last 400 years, may have washed away any artifacts the colonists left behind. Losing my papers. So archaeologist Eric Klingelhofer and Guy Prentice disagree with this assessment. They feel that the recession Walsh is referring to happened closer to the end of the last ice age. By referencing maps that Governor White made of the area in the late 1500s, the land really hasn't changed all that much. So since 1937, the mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke has been relived every year in a play called The Lost Colony. It is performed outdoors at the Wayside Theater at Fort Raleigh, North Carolina, and is now on my fucking bucket list.
Okay.
I want to go see that play.
Yeah.
It looks really cool. It's like, Queen Elizabeth with the big ruff and the giant dresses, and it looks really well produced. It looks gorgeous. I'm like, okay, I'll go check that out. So, yeah, Lost Colony of Roanoke. I had no idea. Like, I had always heard that they found a skeleton, but that was those were the 15 guys that got left behind by Grenville. Like, I had always heard the story wrong.
That was the first lost colony of Roanoke.
Yeah.
So this white fellow, does he have ancestors now? Has anyone tried to do any DNA tracing?
That's what I was thinking. All you have to do is try to find anybody. I don't know if the Croton people still exist. I don't know where they might be at this point, but you could do a DNA test. You could do testing to see if there's any cross. Because, Virginia Dare was a baby. If she had lived long enough to marry and have babies, anybody actually would have had more children. They would have been raised in the Croton village. Why wouldn't they marry into it? Right. It just seems like that would be something you could do, is do genetic testing to see if there's any link. Right. I don't know if White has any other, if he has other, I'm sure he has other children.
And it's such a hot topic. I would imagine that people must have brought this up to their heirs or something, you would think, right?
Yeah, if not, within the last, 10 years for sure, because it's, a big thing. Getting genetic testing is huge.
Exactly, yeah. And then I'm thinking, and all of a sudden in America somewhere, you pop up all these other descendants.
Yeah. Because
and then maybe you find out what happened to them a little bit.
Yeah, you could definitely connect some dots and, make some nice speculation as to what might have happened to them.
Yeah. Or if no DNA shows up, then we can maybe assume that they all died out.
Yeah.
At that time.
They didn't want to intermarry, disease or something. Or
they were killed or whatever.
Yeah. And they've only really excavated one part of Roanoke Island. If they took the bodies, even, half a mile away and buried them, if they actually did find bodies, buried them elsewhere, we'd never know. Or threw them in the ocean. You'd never know.
Yeah. Seems like throwing them in the ocean would be the way to go.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to bury anybody. It's a lot less labor intensive. Mm-hmm. Especially when you got 102 people.
Yeah, right. And that'll keep the smell down.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just have the marine life eat them. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Hey guys, my name is Tara.
And my name is Jessica, and together we co-host the podcast, Three Spooked Girls.
If you love the paranormal
or murder,
join us every Monday as we tell our listeners about a new spooky tale or true crime case.
We'll have a special drink recipe each episode picked out by me for you to enjoy while we scare the hell out of you.
You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever the hell else you listen to podcasts.
Come hang out with us and get your spooky on.
Okay, so my unsolved mystery disappearance thingy is Solomon Northup.
Okay.
He wrote 12 Years a Slave.
Oh, okay.
Which is a memoir of his life.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it was a book, but now it's a movie, and I haven't read the book or seen the movie.
I saw the movie a long time ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Solomon Northup was born July 10th, 1807 or 1808 in Shroon, New York, which is now called Minerva.
So he was free from birth.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, that makes a big difference. He wasn't like enslaved, and then free and then
freed. No. No.
Okay.
Nope. He was. Yep. So he's born in upstate New York and close to the border of Vermont. And he wrote in 12 Years a Slave that his birth year was 1808, but I feel like there is some evidence somewhere that his birth year was a year earlier. So that's why there's a dispute on his birth year. And if you look him up online, it basically says everywhere 1807 or 1808.
Okay.
So 12 Years a Slave was published in 1853.
Okay.
And around 1863, he disappeared from sight and from record, which would be at that time mostly census information.
Mm-hmm.
And the American Civil War was from April 12th, 1861 to April 9th, 1865, just to give a frame of reference for time. So in 1875, a census lists his wife as widowed. Mm-hmm. And so I think historians believe he was probably deceased at that point. But how he died and where he was buried continues to remain unknown.
Oh, interesting.
So Solomon was born a free person of color. His father, Mintus, had been born into slavery with the Northup family in Rhode Island in 1772 and moved to New York when the Northup family relocated. In 1797, his master, Captain Henry Northup, died and manumitted Mintus in his will, which is a fancy word for a slave freed by their master.
Oh, okay.
So Mintus took Northup as a surname, and he ended up owning a farm, which gave him enough property to earn the right to vote, which was a really big deal.
Wow, yeah.
Very few black men could vote, and I believe all their voting rights were revoked until 1870 when all black men were granted the right to vote. So I think sometime around the 1840s, 1850s, all black men's rights to vote were revoked until 1870.
Okay.
So he died when Solomon was around 20 years old. Very little is known about Solomon's mother, including her name, but Solomon wrote that she was born a free quadroon, which is a person with 1/4 African heritage.
Okay.
She died when Solomon was in captivity, which ended when he was around 45.
Okay.
So Solomon had an older brother, Joseph, and they were born under the legal doctrine of partis sequitur ventrum, which basically means offspring follows womb. So they were both born free.
Okay.
This was not common. The doctrine of partis sequitur ventrum was really a way to create more slaves with white fathers who no longer had to legally acknowledge these offspring.
Mm-hmm.
It was a colonial law passed in 1662. in English law, the offspring follows the status of the father, and this was no bueno for the institution of slavery, so it was changed in the Americas.
All those white guys couldn't keep it in their pants with their slave women.
That's
so
right.
They definitely don't want those kids having any rights at all.
And they don't want to have to be financially responsible for them either.
Right.
So Solomon grew up working on his parents' farm, and he was educated. He was a musician, and he earned part of his living when he was older by playing the violin.
Oh.
When he was around 20 or 21, he married Ann Hampton, a woman of color, and I'm just assuming that she was a free woman of color. Mm-hmm. They had 3 children who then would have also been born free, assuming that Anne was free, which I do. So they owned a farm and lived in upstate New York for the first 5 or 6 years of their marriage, and then they sold the farm in 1834 and moved to Saratoga Springs, which is still nearby in upstate. Mm-hmm. Solomon played the violin and did seasonal work to earn money, and Anne cooked in various kitchens to earn a living. In 1841, Solomon met 2 men who claimed that they were circus performers, and they tried to recruit him to join their circus when it came to New York City to play for several shows. And he left with the men for New York City, where he had never been, and he actually played a violin show when he was there. Mm-hmm. The men then convinced Solomon to travel to Washington, D.C. to see their actual circus perform, which they told him would soon be traveling to New York City. And this was really important as slavery was legal in D.C.
Right.
And free Black people stayed in the North for many reasons, safety being paramount. So because Solomon had expected the trip to New York City to be quick and to not include a side jaunt to D.C., he hadn't told his wife what he was up to, and he left his free papers at home.
Oh, no.
So the 2 men he was with drugged him and changed his name to Platt and sold him to a slave trader with the story that he was a fugitive slave, and he was then sold to a Louisiana plantation slave owner. And this is what 12 Years a Slave is all about.
That is like the worst story. I wonder how many times this happened.
I mean, enough.
Ugh.
And they do it, those guys do it to make money.
Yeah.
That's the only purpose.
They're basically slave traders too.
Yeah, but they're like illegal slaves.
They're illegal, yeah.
Just fucked up, but yeah. So he was beaten when he protested that he was a free man, and he was presented to buyers as a slave from Georgia. And then on the ship from D.C. to New Orleans, he caught smallpox.
Oh, no. That's like the worst thing ever.
So Solomon persuaded an English sailor to send a letter to the son or relative that's kind of muddled the history of his father's old owner. Mm-hmm. He was a lawyer, but there wasn't much that could be done because no one knew where Solomon was.
Yeah.
So in New Orleans, he was sold to a small Baptist farmer who was kind to his slaves, but money problems forced him to sell several of his slaves, and Solomon was sold to a carpenter who was cruel and would beat him. His new owner was a new owner, and it's speculated that Solomon was his first slave.
Okay.
So he was then sold to a planter who kept him for 10 years. The new master was cruel and whipped his slaves daily and would rape a female slave, which would lead to further beatings for her from the mistress of the plantation.
Lovely.
And, because it's not a problem that your husband can't keep his dick in his pants and not rape these women. It's clearly she's a temptress, seductress.
Yeah. So many problems to unpack in that one.
It just makes sense. It's clearly the woman's problem for enticing the man.
Yeah.
In 1852, a Canadian carpenter came to work on the plantation Solomon was on. He would speak of abolition on the plantation, and so Solomon eventually confided in him and told him who he was. and the Canadian wrote to Solomon's friends with details on where he was being held. So that lawyer, son, or relative of his father's previous owner is the one who came into Louisiana to get Solomon. He came with a sheriff and a senator to make sure that Solomon was handed over alive. And, she was. And his owner, in quotes, decided not to contest his free papers in court. And
That's crazy.
And so Solomon went home after 12 years.
The son of his old owner did not have to do any of that.
No, he did it out of kindness.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And quite honestly, the Louisiana plantation owner probably could have killed Solomon without much of a legal consequence because he was pissed. He's losing a slave that he paid money for. Like, someone's going to have to pay for that. So he did, decide not to kill him, to avoid further fine from the courts or something like that.
It's interesting that you would buy something and then beat it regularly. That's interesting to me. It's like free license for psychopaths to get away with their weird fetishes in open.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
You think you'd want to keep your property, in good health?
Yeah.
I guess maybe they figured out how to beat them enough so that they were in good health, but
it's very, submissive. Very, what's the word I'm looking for? Sadistic.
It is. It's cruel. It's all it is.
Very sadistic.
It's just cruel. And because we know that they're not all like that. His first owner was actually kind to his slaves and didn't beat, whatever that means, but we know it means that he didn't beat them physically. So, so on the way back to New York, they stopped to file charges against the slave trader who had sold Solomon south. But in D.C., the laws were that a black man could not testify in court.
Of course not.
So the slave trader and the other, those two men that drugged him said that Solomon approached them as a slave from Georgia who was for sale.
Oh, because that's what I would do.
Hi, I'm a slave.
I run away.
Home. Yeah,
I would like you to put me back in chains, please.
Yeah,
that's reasonable.
Can you, please sell me? I've lost my home. Please. Please.
If you can, find the meanest cracker ever to sell me to, please.
But that was their defense.
Oh my God.
I know.
And it worked. Hey, white people.
The slave trader was acquitted, of course.
Of course.
And he briefly brought a countersuit against Solomon for deceiving him as a slave who was for sale.
Oh my God.
But he eventually dropped the case.
What a dickhead.
What a dickhead.
Oh my God.
I know, but reading this, I just feel like nothing's changed,
No, it really hasn't. It really, that's the real shitty part of it. It's kind of sort of the same way, right?
Right, yeah. So in 1853, 12 Years a Slave was published, we're still several years before the Civil War. Mm-hmm. The book sold 3,000 copies over the next few years, and Solomon took the money from the sales and bought property in upstate New York. He became an abolitionist and began lecturing around the Northeast and Canada, and it is also said that he helped slaves relocate to these areas as part of the Underground Railroad.
Cool.
But by the early 1860s, Solomon had disappeared from public record and from public sight. He's no longer listed on census records, and even though his wife is. And then by 1875, his wife was listing herself as widowed on the census. And that was the first time she had done that.
So he's been missing for several years before she does that. For a census or two before.
For at least 12 years. And it was a census or two because she was living alone, but still listed as married between the time he disappeared and the time she listed herself as a
And he's just not
widow.
on the registry.
not on the registry. People stopped writing about him in their letters. People stopped seeing him in public.
Weird.
So the rumors around his disappearance range from he was killed during work as a spy for the Union. He was kidnapped again and sold into slavery. Or he just died somewhere unknown among people who didn't know him, and he was buried in a potter's grave.
Interesting.
But history has no record of what has become of Solomon Northup.
Wow, that's really weird.
Yeah.
I didn't know all that. I don't know if they went into it at the end of the movie or not.
I didn't see the movie. I guess what they say is they put a placard up at the end that says something similar. He disappeared from record around 1875 and was never heard from again. No one knows what happened to him.
Yeah, I wonder if he was out doing stuff and that was why his wife didn't list him as being part of the house.
Yeah.
Maybe she just assumed like he'd finally died because he just never came back.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was gone 12 years the last time and came back, but maybe she did it based, either she had heard a rumor or she did it based on his age. Assuming that he must be dead by the time he's nearly 70. I don't know.
Right. Well, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So that's the story of Solomon Northup.
That was good. Good job.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I would want to read the book, but it sounds so fucking depressing.
I never that book and then Uncle Tom's Cabin were the two pinnacle books from that time period. I had never read Uncle Tom's Cabin either.
I read parts of it in college, I thought.
I know. I didn't. I know that we were assigned to, and I don't know why. I never did.
I'm
never
pretty
did.
sure I read it. I'm pretty sure I did.
I'm pretty sure I was assigned to, and I'm pretty sure I never did. I don't know what happened.
You were like, nope.
But that's not like me. I never would have not done my homework in college, so I don't.
You might have had a choice between, it might have been an extra thing.
Oh, that's true. Or yeah, I could have had a choice between readings or something.
Yeah. Huh. I wonder what happened to all these people. Where did they go?
You know, what's interesting is you and I this week, we both picked historical disappearances.
Yeah, we did.
Look at us go.
I know. So in sync. So in sync.
Well, this is Demi World, and we are looking at the underbellies of ancienter societies than our own.
Ooh, and next week's going to be even more ancient.
It is.
It's even more ancient.
Yes, archaeological.
Yes, archaeological mysteries.
So stay tuned.
Yeah, I'm Cyndi.
And I'm Kelly.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye. This has been Demi World. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Demi World Podcast. You can visit our website for show notes at demiworld.net. If you want to reach out, you can email us at demiworldpodcast@gmail.com. You can support us on Patreon at Demiworld Podcast. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks for listening. Bye.